China is deploying a ruthless Taiwan strategy that combines military, economic and legal pressure with a single goal: strangle Taiwan before the US can react. The latest military drills are just the beginning. Beijing is building a plan to isolate Taiwan, choke its economy and force a surrender without firing a shot. The strategy is aggressive. The timeline is accelerating, and if it works, Taiwan could fall before America even gets a chance to respond. The latest drills are the clearest warning yet, and they're just the beginning. China carrying out drills in and around Taiwanese waters is nothing new. However, 2025 brought with it what may be the largest joint drills the People's Liberation Army, or PLA, has carried out in the region. In its April 2nd report, The Guardian said that the PLA deployed 76 aircraft and over 20 ships from its Navy and Coast Guard, including the terrifying Shandong aircraft carrier, to positions around the main Taiwanese island. Exercises took place in both the southern and central areas of the Taiwan Strait, with the PLA practicing how it would hit key Taiwanese energy infrastructure and ports in the event of an invasion. The exercise focused on subjects of identification and verification, warning and expulsion, and interception and detention, so as to test the troops' capabilities of area regulation and control, joint blockade and control, and precision strikes on key targets, said a Chinese PLA spokesperson in a statement. Translation: China is doing everything it can to prepare for war. Naturally, Taiwan is worried, and it's not the only nation to express concern. The US and European Union, or EU, paid close attention to the Chinese exercises. Once again, China's aggressive military activities and rhetoric toward Taiwan only serve to exacerbate tensions and put the region's security and the world's prosperity at risk, read a statement from the US State Department in the wake of the drills. The United States supports peace and stability across the Taiwan Strait and opposes unilateral changes to the status quo, including through force or coercion. This idea of preserving the status quo in Taiwan was mirrored by a statement released by an EU spokesperson who said, "The EU has a direct interest in the preservation of the status quo in the Taiwan Strait. We oppose any actions that change the status quo by force or coercion." Those statements are so similar that they may as well have been delivered jointly. They also provide a clear message to China. The US and EU are united in their desire to keep Taiwan safe. But they're also worried, and they should be. Army Recognition's report on the drills reveals that China's ships and aircraft came within 24 nautical miles of Taiwan's coast, which is far too close for comfort. China deployed a host of aircraft, including its J-15 carrier-borne jets, which took off from the Shandong, and Z-9 helicopters. Sorties were carried out by several of China's air units, with multiple aircraft, including the previously mentioned J-16s, along with Su-30 MKK, J-10CS, and J-11Bs taking part. Add China's H-6K strategic bombers to that mix, which can carry the KD-21 carrier killer bomb, and you get a terrifying mix of aerial power designed to represent a clear threat to Taiwan. And that's not all. China also deployed several support aircraft in its sorties, including its Y-20U aerial tankers, which allow the PLA's fighter jets to refuel in mid-air. Accompanying those aircraft were a host of naval assets, starting with the Shandong and complemented by a host of warships. China deployed several of its destroyers, including the Type 052D Jianji and the Type 055 Shanyang, as well as several frigates. China's Type 901 replenishment ships, which serve a similar role to its aerial tankers, only for China's warships, were also present during the drills. It all adds up to a concerted deployment of combined naval and aerial power that showcases one thing: China is capable of blockading Taiwan in the event of a war. And it gets worse for Taiwan. China's military exercises didn't only see it deploy its ships and aircraft into strategic positions to demonstrate how it would invade the island. Live fire was a key component of the drills. CNN reports that the second day of the military drills, which occurred between April 1st and April 2nd, saw China carry out live fire strikes within the East China Sea, in addition to the country practicing how it would blockade key shipping routes heading into Taiwan. CNN also revealed the name of the two-day exercise, dubbing it Strait Thunder 2025A. That's an interesting name in its own right. The 2025A portion of the moniker suggests that this isn't the only military drill China intends to carry out this year. There will be a 2025B, and maybe even a C, D, and so on. As for the live strikes, China's Eastern Theater Command spokesperson, Colonel Shi Yi, was surprisingly open about what China did. He said that China conducted live-fire long-range strike drills in designated areas of the East China Sea, adding that the drills involved precision strikes on simulated targets such as key ports and energy facilities and achieved the intended results. In other words, not only did China carry out these dangerous military drills, but it proved to itself, and anybody watching, that it could hit the targets at which it aims. Targets such as Taiwan's ports and critical energy systems. Army Recognition offers more details about these live-fire drills. It notes that China used its PCL-191 multiple launch rocket systems to launch 16 massive rocket salvos during its 2-day exercise. Those 300mm rockets can travel up to 31 miles. They're also the weakest versions of the rockets the PCL-191 can fire, with China having access to a 750mm variant it would use if targeting Taiwan directly. It's also important to note why China is choosing ports and energy infrastructure as its targets in these exercises. The purpose of taking out ports is obvious. China wants to show Taiwan that it can prevent the island from sending out its own ships in the event of an invasion. Add the destruction of ports, making it impossible for commercial ships to deliver much needed products to Taiwan, and the strategy is clearly to starve Taiwan out in the event of an invasion. As for hitting energy infrastructure, Army Recognition says that China's live-fire drills simulated attacks against Taiwan's Yongan LNG or liquid natural gas terminal. That terminal handles over 11 million tons of LNG imports per year, and losing it would be a massive dent in Taiwan's ability to defend itself. Central Taiwan University economist Wu Daren points out that Taiwan only has between 7 and 14 days of gas reserves available. A blockade like the one China practiced in early April would cause a massive fuel crisis on the island in a matter of weeks. There was one last element of these drills that separated them from those China had conducted previously. China also involved its Coast Guard. According to SFG Media, Taiwanese military expert Hu Wangyin-shan said that these vessels practice exercises related to pushing back and even detaining civilian ships. That's where another element of China's Taiwan strategy comes into play here. While its warships and aircraft bombard Taiwan's ports and energy infrastructure, its Coast Guard will be hard at work preventing civilian ships, such as those delivering supplies to the island, from entering Taiwan. Not only is that clever from a blockading perspective, but it also reinforces China's claims that the Taiwan Strait should be governed by Chinese laws. By now, it's clear that China is getting serious about its efforts to take Taiwan. These drills show that it has a clear strategy in place, along with the equipment it needs to carry out its plans. However, that raises a question. Why is China carrying out Strait Thunder 2025A along with any future drills in the Strait Thunder series now? Our initial answer comes from China's desire to ramp up tensions in Taiwan. That's according to CNN, which says that Taiwan is home to 23 million people and lies just 80 miles from China. These latest drills are simply the latest of many China uses to place pressure on an island it believes it owns. They're also China's way of saying that they're willing to take the island by force if necessary. However, China may not be achieving its goal on the pressure front. CNN spoke to several Taiwanese residents to get their thoughts about the strikes. One, named Olias Lin, said, "These drills happen so frequently, they're now like a daily routine." Another resident, Hawkin Lee, added that people here will not be too frightened by this. That likely won't matter to China. Its goal isn't to terrify the Taiwanese people, though that would be a nice bonus. Beijing wants to send a message to Taiwan's leaders. The PLA said as much itself, claiming that Strait Thunder 2025A was intended to serve as a stern warning and forceful deterrent against Taiwan independent separatist forces. Those forces seemingly include Taiwan's recently elected President Lai Ching-te. China's Taiwan's Affairs Office dubbed the exercises a severe punishment for what it calls Lai's rampant provocations for independence. China's propaganda highlights what it thinks about Lai, including one cartoon in which it calls Lai a parasite who's supposedly poisoning Taiwan against China. Beijing has every reason to be upset. It was only in March that Lai dubbed China a foreign hostile force as he announced a volley of 17 measures to improve Taiwan's security and confront Chinese spies. Those measures included the strengthening of Taiwanese oversight on any visiting Chinese nationals and the restoration of a military court system, allowing Taiwan to take faster action against people it identifies as Chinese spies. China sees Lai as a threat to its goal of absorbing Taiwan. The acceleration of its invasion plans with Strait Thunder 2025A is one of China's ways of confronting that threat. The operation also serves as a showcase of China's strength. China's Eastern Theater Command released a graphic to accompany its naval drills, captioned with the ominous words, "closing in." Other graphics showcase Lai as an insect being roasted over an open flame, demonstrating that China is trying to send a clear message to Taiwan: we're more powerful than you. And it's right, at least when it comes to pure numbers. According to Global Firepower, which ranks 145 military nations annually using over 60 factors, China has Taiwan beat in practically every military department. China's active military of 2.035 million service members dwarfs Taiwan's active military of 215,000. Taiwan flips the script when it comes to reserves though, with 2.31 million of its citizens ready to be called up for war compared to just 510,000 reserves for China. However, it likely won't be personnel that determine the outcome of a war between China and Taiwan. Navy and aerial assets will be key, and China comes out on top in both departments. The PLA's Air Force has access to around 3,300 aircraft versus around 760 in Taiwan. This includes more fighter jets, more transport, and a dangerous fleet of aerial tankers, allowing China's jets to stay in the air longer. On the naval front, China has about 750 ships in its fleet, compared to about 100 in Taiwan. These ships include a trio of aircraft carriers, including the previously mentioned Shandong. Those carriers will be key to China's strategy. They serve as the launching point for China's jets and choppers, along with being key to instituting the blockade China practiced during its most recent drills. China also has more submarines, more destroyers and frigates compared to Taiwan. What was seen in Strait Thunder 2025A was just a fraction of the power China could bring to a war with Taiwan. China wants Taiwan to know that. It starts with intimidation, followed by the promise that China could do a lot worse than its April exercises imply. China is sending a message by ramping up its military drills. And it's a message that isn't directed at Taiwan alone. Beijing wants the United States to know that it's ready for a fight if the US gets involved in defending Taiwan. That's a definite possibility. Under previous President Joe Biden, the US repeatedly said it was ready to use force to defend Taiwan, according to SFG. Current President Donald Trump seems likely to follow through on these promises. The US released the interim National Defense Strategic Guidance document in March that appears to reinforce its support of Taiwan. It's also no coincidence that China's drills come only days after US Secretary of Defense Hegseth visited Japan. There, Hegseth met with Japanese Defense Minister Nakatani to specifically discuss China's actions in the Taiwan Strait. The ministers took note of activities by the PLA, including the military situation around Taiwan, and emphasized the importance of peace and stability across the Taiwan Strait, said Japan's Ministry of Defense in a statement after the visit. Focus Taiwan says that China's decision to launch its drills in the aftermath of Hegseth's visit was about testing Americans' bottom line regarding security issues in the strait. In other words, just what would the US response be to a build-up of forces off Taiwan's coast? It's not immediately clear, but China is asking the question, and that's extremely dangerous for Taiwan. It's also hard to ignore the fact that China's exercises may have also been a direct response to Taiwan's own Hanquan drills. China deploying its ships and aircraft to mirror those exercises allowed the PLA to assess Taiwan's combat readiness and forces Taiwan into spending more money on monitoring PLA activities while trying to conduct its own exercises. So, some conclusions can be drawn from why China conducted these exercises. They're both a test and a threat. On the testing side, China wants to figure out just how deep a US response would be to its efforts to invade Taiwan. It also wants to test Taiwan itself, using the exercises to assess the island's capabilities and the defenses it has in place to prevent China's blockading strategy. As for the threat, China is becoming clearer than ever. It knows what it needs to do to severely weaken Taiwan. Taking out simulated energy infrastructure and ports delivers the clear message that China is aware that Taiwan's status as an island is also one of its biggest weaknesses. Which begs the question, what comes next? More flexing of China's maritime muscle is the likely answer. There's already a hint of this from the naming conventions used for China's most recent military drills. But China's actions in the Taiwan Strait are far from its only efforts to project power in the Indo-Pacific. As The Guardian highlighted on April 14, China used March and April to carry out live-fire drills near Vietnam and Australia as well. It also unveiled new deep-sea cable cutters it could use to wreak havoc on its enemy's ability to use the internet for communication, along with new landing barges that would enable an amphibious assault of Taiwan if needed. It's all about pressure from China. Beijing is testing the responses of its enemies because it's preparing for something big, something that may come in 2027. That's the year many have earmarked as the one in which China will finally follow through on all of its threats against Taiwan. As the Lowy Institute points out, the US in particular has long been fixated on the 2027 deadline China's President Xi Jinping has in place for the absorption of Taiwan into China. That year has a lot of historical significance for China. It marks the 100th anniversary of the PLA's formation, along with the year in which Xi is likely to secure his unprecedented fourth term as China's president. Whether 2027 will represent the year China finally invades Taiwan or the year when it believes its preparations to be complete is almost irrelevant at this point. What's happening in 2025 is a clear acceleration of China's efforts to strangle Taiwan. It's firing off warnings, literally in some cases, as it brings itself ever closer to fulfilling its goal of taking the island. To achieve its 2027 goal, China has to know that it's capable of doing two things: neutralizing external intervention and forcing Taiwan into a quick surrender. On the latter front, the 2025 exercises showcase how China will do that. Creating blockades while taking out Taiwan's ports and energy infrastructure will leave just Taiwan's aerial defenses in China's way. With a blockade preventing incoming support, China would just need to outlast Taiwan on the aerial front. As we saw earlier from the sheer power difference between Taiwan and China, that shouldn't be too much of a problem. As for the neutralization aspect of the plan, a naval blockade is only possible if no nations come to Taiwan's defense. That's where testing the US response comes into play. Right now, the US is tied up in dealing with Iran and the Houthis in Yemen. China will be keeping a close watch and maybe accelerating its Taiwan invasion plans because it sees that the US is distracted. However, it's not just the military aspect with which Taiwan needs to concern itself. As part of China's strategy of applying constant pressure, it's also leaning on legal and economic fronts. SFG says these approaches represent China's preferred method for taking Taiwan. Beijing would rather not fight. Even if it can mitigate the US response, it would still have to expend a significant amount of its military force to take Taiwan, along with dealing with mass resistance on the island itself if it occupies. Legal and economic measures would put so much pressure on Taiwan that it capitulates faster than expected. For instance, China created its recommendations on criminal punishment for pro-independence supporters in June 2024. That new law allows China to deliver sentences up to the death penalty for people it believes support Taiwan's independence. Those sentences can be delivered even if the accused isn't present to defend themselves in a Chinese court. It wouldn't matter if they were. The law is China giving itself the green light to conduct mass arrests of Taiwan's largest pro-independence voices. Economically, China has already identified ports and energy infrastructure as being key to Taiwan's ability to sustain itself. China is also dangling economic carrots in front of Taiwan's people. For instance, China created the Fujian Cross-Strait Integrated Development Demonstration Zone recently. That program offers investment and support to young Taiwanese entrepreneurs, meaning it's clearly an effort to tempt Taiwan's youth into rebelling against the island's leadership. Similar efforts have also seen China get deeply involved in non-governmental organizations operating in Taiwan, along with the island's media outlets and religious groups. And these efforts may be working. SFG points out that 22% of people in Taiwan said that they're unwilling to fight against China themselves or send relatives to the war, compared to 20% who say they'll take up arms. The majority, as of February 2023, said they'll simply follow the government's instructions to avoid war. Still, Taiwan's residents say they approve of broadening military strengthening. February 2025 saw 70% of the island's residents claim they support higher military budgets and deeper cooperation with the United States. The latter point is important. It makes it clear that many in Taiwan are relying on the US to intervene if China invades. China's goal now is to convince the US that such an intervention would prove too costly and risk triggering an international war. If China is successful, Taiwan is in major trouble. With China accelerating its military drills while applying pressure on multiple fronts, so much hinges on the US response. If China plays its cards well, it could strangle Taiwan before the US even has a chance to do anything about it. But do you think that could happen? And what do you think about China's recent military exercises and its efforts to place pressure on Taiwan? Will we see China invade or make some other effort to absorb Taiwan in 2027? Let us know your thoughts in the comments, and remember to subscribe to The Military Show for more commentary on the latest developments in the Indo-Pacific. We're an independent source of news and information about military affairs around the globe and appreciate your support.